broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on effective transition from capture to proposals. Thank you for investing this time with us and our industry leaders. I am Mallory Price and will facilitate today's session. As a reminder for APMP members, this webinar applies toward your continuing education units for certification. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the questions tab in your control panel, and at the end of the webinar, we will answer as many as we can. As with all Shipley webinars, this presentation will be uploaded to our website by tomorrow. We have two experts joining us today, Dr. Charles Painter and Nia Mahalati. Dr. Painter, will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Certainly, it's a pleasure to be here. I've been in the federal space for about 39 years now. I served 18 years as a CIA officer and 5 years at the National Reconnaissance Office, ending up as a deputy division chief. And during this time, I had the opportunity to sit on various source selection committees, evaluating proposals for products and services. Since 2003, I've worked as a capture manager for a large systems integrator, as well as for mid-cap companies and multiple small businesses in the GovCon market. I'm currently the Vice President of Business Development for InfiniSource Consulting Solutions, a highly successful woman-owned small business 8A graduate, providing professional services to DoD and federal civilian customers.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And Nia, would you share a little bit about yourself with us?
Sure, Mallory. I have 29 years of experience out of the federal space with the Army, Department of State, Defense Intelligence Agency, and then as a owner of a small business, 8M, where I served as, my company served as in 2 mentor proteges that were formal with larger companies very successfully. And I am now currently with Shipley.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you both so much for sharing your wisdom with us today. We are delighted to have you. So to kick us off, we wanted to mention a little bit about Shipley. We are a global consulting, training, and professional services firm. We have business development, sales, capture, and we also have consulting in that regard and training as well. So we go from full life cycle BD, capture, sales, and proposal management and writing consulting services, as well as training, certification, and career development, such as this free webinar that you are all attending. So that is a little bit about us. And Nia, I will pass the mic to you.
Sure. So moving on to the agenda, we could go and kind of go down the agenda. We're going to start with an introduction. We're going to talk a little bit about what is business development, what is capture management, what are the essential components of capture management, how is capture management related to winning work, and what does the effective transition from capture to proposals look like. Then we'll have a section with some final notes, and then we'll open it up to the audience for questions and answers. So starting us off with the question, what is business development? And essentially, it's really about who has the money, what do they want to buy, and how does that need align with our products and services as an organization. So I'm going to have Dr. Painter kind of kick us off. Dr. Painter, what are your thoughts? I know you've been the VP of BD for many different size organizations. Give us your thoughts on business development as a whole overall.
Sure. You know, business development is frequently misunderstood, misidentified in the GovCon community. Depending upon a company's size, sometimes the concepts of business development and capture management can be confused. In a large company environment, BD, or business development, is primarily concerned with identifying future long-range opportunities, developing relationships and strategic partnerships necessary to ensure that the company not only grows, but that the company can maintain its expansion over time. BD professionals scan the business horizon for emerging opportunities that align with their company's goals and capabilities. The work entails identifying potential long-range markets, probable funding sources, and environmental factors that can affect a customer's future buying behavior. At base, business development is about ideation, doing the necessary groundwork to bring in new business. And Nia, as you mentioned, it doesn't matter if you're selling products or services B2B, B2C, or B2G. You have to understand who has the money, what do they want to buy, and how their future needs align with your company's products and services. That's what BD is really all about. So how do business developers do this? They develop and continually analyze and evaluate a long-range strategic business plan. This plan will normally have a 3 to 5 year horizon and will include an analysis of current and future market trends, an honest evaluation of capabilities, and very importantly, past performance. And finally, the funding profiles of current, potential, future customers. The primary focus of business development is what I like to call relationship marketing, gathering intelligence and building relationships, getting smart about the customer and potential opportunities, and creating a portfolio of qualified leads for the company to pursue. Business development hands off to capture management when it's time to move beyond lead identification and qualification into actual pursuit.
Okay. So moving on, and one of the things that we wanted to add on our end from Shipley is what we essentially teach in our courses as well, is for BD, it's about taking the strategic plan that you have and aligning the opportunities with that plan. It's taking the core customer base that you have, determining what other customers you can grow into that space, and doing a competitive analysis of your environment, either products, services, whatever that may be. But that's essentially what that entails. It's strategic positioning, right? Long range, like you said, Dr. Painter.
Right.
So moving on to the next slide, this moves us right into capture once those things are done.
So your point's well taken, Nia. And while business development is strategic, capture management is tactical. Capture involves the detailed pursuit of a specific opportunity and is dedicated to maximizing the probability of winning a particular contract, IDIQ, or single award effort. This pursuit involves the alignment of company solutions to a customer's specific requirements, enabling the crafting of a tailored proposal and navigating the intricacies of government procurement processes. Essentially, the capture manager steers a potential deal from an identified opportunity all the way to a contract win. I can honestly say that capture managers have one of the most difficult jobs in a GovCon company. Capture management is a high-stress endeavor, and it's not for the faint of heart. Capture managers need an understanding of marketing, corporate strategy, proposal development, finance, pricing, contracts, human resources, and basically everything else. It's a difficult job because very few people have all the necessary experience. And capture management sometimes have to spend more time selling an opportunity internally to their management than they end up selling to the customer. The ability to effectively qualify opportunities passes from the business developer's portfolio. It's an important task in capture management, and there's a number of particular areas of analysis required. The BDs have completed some degree of qualification, but circumstances and procurements change and evolve, and this requires the capture manager to address specific questions that must be answered honestly. And here are a few examples. How does a specific opportunity align with your company's goals? Does the type of work match your company's objectives? Is the procurement structured in a manner that aligns with your goals? Can you make money on this contract? Can you make enough money on this contract? Can you perform the work? Are there technical gaps in your solutions, and have you analyzed these? Do you have the past performance to support the bid? In other words, are your past performance examples of sufficient size, scope, and complexity? Are they in a customer space? Will you need to team up to win this work? And if so, with who? Will you take a prime or subcontractor position? And then finally, is the work winnable? What's your honest probability of win? Are you facing a high-performing entrenched incumbent? Do you lack customer exposure or familiarity? Do you have the capability and past performance, or are there gaps? Now, once qualified, these opportunities populate the capture manager's pipeline for development. The capture manager continually performs several forms of analysis to develop pipelined opportunities. The first is an analysis of the customer. What is their organizational mission? What are their overall goals? How does this procurement support the mission and the goals of the customer? What are the customer's hot buttons? What do they really care about? What problems do they have that you can solve? Are they under budget pressure? Things of this nature. A second form of analysis evaluates the competition. Black hat reviews, when properly done, are extremely effective in anticipating the likely strategies and solutions of competitors and determining gaps in your own strategies and solutions. Competitive SWOT analyses can be highly effective to assess your competitor's strengths, weaknesses, the opportunities they have, and also the threats they face. And these analyses can be used to discern the probable strategies and vulnerabilities of your competitors. Both of these techniques can develop information that can be used to ghost the competition in your proposal. Finally, once you've completed a technical gap analysis, it's important to closely analyze your teaming needs. Which teammates can cover your technical gaps? Which teammates have positive customer relationships that your team can leverage? I encourage capture managers to trust but verify when considering potential teammates. Do they actually have the corporate experience and past performance to cover the technical aspects that you need? Do they have solid CPARs? Definitively identify their past performance examples. What is the depth and quality of their customer relationships? All of these areas are important to consider when making effective teaming decisions.
Thank you, Dr. Painter. You actually answered a lot of what we cover in Shipley as well. For capture, really, in Shipley, we have defined it to the 4 C's, which is essentially starting with the client, the customer analysis, moving on to the competitive analysis, which is the second C. The third being company, which is your organization, and fourth being cost, because here what we're looking at essentially is we're aiming at best value, not lowest price technically acceptable. So you covered all of that. And then the last thing we kind of wanted to mention on our end is that this is, I know you mentioned federal government a lot, but this does apply to state, local, SLED, and also commercial work, NGOs, IGOs, because the principles and the concepts are the same, essentially, right? The terminology might differ a little bit, but the concepts are consistent with, everything that you've explained. So with that, we can move on. So here, Dr. Painter, if you want to talk about, before we move into the transition from capture to proposals, which, those two things are simultaneous, they work together, it's not a handoff. We really need to understand what the essential components of effective, when we use the word effective capture management, what does that mean to you?
Well, there are a couple points here that I think are essential to make. First of all, I think capture managers have to hold a pre-solicitation solutioning and strategy session or sessions during the capture process. And these sessions pull together all of the capture management activities to date and should include the capture manager, the proposal manager, potentially the technical writers and subject matter experts, the pricing authority, and teammates if they've been identified. You need to ask some basic questions. What do you know? What do you not know? What questions have you answered and what questions remain? Evaluate your technical solutions based on the information that you have. What are your discriminators and win things? What is your pricing strategy to win? If there's an incumbent, take the time to honestly assess their performance. Where are they performing well? And where are they having difficulties? And perhaps more importantly, why are they having difficulties? What are the customer's perceptions of the incumbent's performance? Now, this information can be obtained through former incumbent employees who are able to talk with you and from former government staff who are not restricted from discussing the program with you. There are also a number of subscription services available who can identify third parties who are familiar with the program or can canvass the customer directly regarding how the incumbent is performing. Establish customer intimacy. Wow. This is many times very, very difficult to do. Often the program office and contracting officers are not accessible. Sometimes you can go through third parties who know the program and contact contracting offices who can help you to introduce your team, your capabilities, or shape the solicitation. But it's a very difficult issue to deal with, establishing customer intimacy or relationship. I will note this: if a market research tools used by the government, such as a source of SALT or an RFI, I encourage you to be assertive in your response. Be sure you write to your response with the customer's perspective in mind. Discuss not only your capabilities, but make recommendations about how the RFP should be released and why. Use this opportunity to shape the solicitation. Align your differentiators against your understanding of the customer's needs. Remember, the strength of the differentiator depends on its importance and relevance to the customer. Your differentiators must answer a basic question: why us? And finally, if the previous solicitation documents are available, or draft statement of work or performance work statement, identify and recruit key personnel based on the requirements as early as possible. Include them by name if you can in the proposal, and obtain exclusive letters of intent.
Thank you, Dr. Painter. I think two of the things that you brought up, without having to go over all of it, you're right. The establishing customer intimacy, that comes up in every single Shipley training. It also comes out in all of the seminars and everything that we attend. As a matter of fact, Shipley has a course, Qualifying to Win, that just has an entire half-a-day section on how to establish that customer intimacy. But there are different ways of doing it. Some of them entail, like you said, the market research stage, the RFI stage, the draft RFP stage. It's important to note, in a nutshell, it's not just about being the technical experts as it comes to the customer. It's taking it to the next level and being the trusted vendor who is essentially telling the customer, this is how this work needs to be completed. This is what it's going to take from a scope, level of effort perspective. This is what it's going to cost you. And here's where you're going to get the benefit, essentially, right? And so we really need to get them to that stage. And there are different processes to do that. So now I think we've covered everything about this, and we can move on to the next slide in terms of the connection between capture management and proposals. So if you were to say, how is capture management related to proposals? We have a lot to say about this in Shipley, but I'll let you talk about this.
Well, I can tell you this: the best capture managers identify what it takes to win, period. They articulate strategies that differentiate. They define what is to be written in a proposal before the writing actually starts. They design an offering that reflects what matters to the customer. The proposal team can then respond to the RFP requirements from the customer's perspective and build a proposal on what it takes to win. Without effective capture, you are setting your proposal team up to be nothing more than document producers, not winners. Now, what separates a good proposal from a great proposal is how well it reflects the customer's perspective instead of merely describing the companies submitting the proposal. This customer perspective is developed through a description of the hot buttons developed by capture management and the customer issues and motivators for issuing a request for proposal to begin with. What do they really care about? Capture managers should provide the proposal team with the keys to emphasize discriminators that focus on 5 elements: people, experience, performance, understanding the customer's goals and objectives, as well as addressing your competitors' weaknesses as your strengths.
I couldn't have said it better myself. So that comes right out of Shipley's, core competencies and terminology. What we say in our courses essentially is, if you haven't done the capture, so the capture really is the strategy and the action plan. The proposal is the description of what you've done in capture. If there has been no capture, there's really nothing to put in the proposal. And we tell people that you can write the proposal in 24 karat gold, you can write it in platinum, it won't matter. Because why? Because your competition will have done that legwork. That's why. So it's really important. We can't emphasize enough how important the relationship between capture and proposals is. To be more specific, the win themes should come out of capture. The discriminators should come out of capture. Now, we can spend a lot of time talking about how to develop those win themes, discriminators. That's what we teach our courses on, but those are more detailed, finite. The overall point is all of those things should be established before this final RFP drops. Because what we don't want to do is put our proposal managers in a position where they're having to copy and paste, Google technical solutions, use their previous management plan. What we want to do is have a robust capture plan that's all inclusive, that we're essentially sharing with them, and it's great to get them involved on the upfront if the organization's set up that way. In a lot of organizations, your capture manager is your proposal manager. It depends on the size and the structure of the organization. Either way, that information should come initially out of capture. That takes us to our next point. So transition. Once you've run an effective capture with all the elements that we've discussed, what does an effective transition from capture to proposals look like? And before you answer that, Dr. Painter, we get a lot of companies, because we've been doing this since 1972, and this is all we do. And they come and they ask us questions about, well, it's a handoff because I'm off to the next. A lot of times because of the way that the structure is set up for the capture manager to bring in as much work as possible. That's not always the most effective way to do it. You want your capture manager involved until that submittal and perhaps 2 weeks afterwards, right?
Right.
So with that, I'll hand it off to you.
Right. The biggest problem with an effective transition from capture to proposals is that there's any discernible transition at all. The best analogy I can give you is that the transition should be similar to a smooth baton pass in a relay race. The capture manager is moving, the proposal manager is moving, and responsibility is passed off from one to the other very, very smoothly. As a capture manager, I've learned that my most important relationships are with my proposal management or manager and my proposal team. I encourage you to keep them informed of your capture activities early and often. In a real sense, as a capture manager, they, your proposal team, are your customers in the process. Early involvement is sometimes difficult, I realize, in large companies, but you should make every effort to keep your proposal personnel informed, seek their input during the capture phase, and take their input seriously. If your company uses a gate or milestone review process during capture, make absolutely sure to include your assigned proposal manager in those sessions. Likewise, after the RFP is released, the capture manager, to your point, Nia, should be included in proposal development color team reviews. Now, the win strategy, win themes, and discriminators have already been developed before the RFP drop, but the capture manager can continue to provide valuable insights throughout the proposal process. Throughout the capture process, as you approach the transition to the proposal team, pay particular attention to sections L and M of the solicitation. I have seen beautiful captures literally fall apart because proposal instructions and source selection criteria were not properly understood, considered, or shaped by the capture manager before the solicitation was released. Construct and follow a comprehensive capture plan that includes clearly defined guidelines as to how the capture information is to be passed from the capture manager to the proposal team. And finally, a best practice that I highly recommend is to position yourself to write a notional pink team version of your proposal before the final RFP release, using the requirements found in a previous or draft solicitation. Work your past performance references. Contact your customers regarding how they will evaluate you. And prepare draft management, staffing plans, and key personnel sections early. All of these are very, very important parts of the transition phase from capture to proposal.
I agree with that 100%. We do tell our participants as well in our courses that ideally, if the time is there, do a pink team, an initial draft, or at least create the components of a pink team. We know we're going to have a management plan. We know we're going to have key personnel. We know that there are going to be tasks. All of that has to be written at some point. Executive summary, same thing. So if we write these things early, we are increasing our P-win because not only are we evaluating what our gaps are and what information we need to obtain, but given that a lot of times when the RFP drops, the turn is very, very quick. We should not be running capture and proposals simultaneously because there simply isn't enough time. And again, it's about winning against the competition. We're not competing, in a silo. So if we're not doing those things to prepare, our competition is. And that's where we really need to try to get out in front of it, like you said, with the past performance, with the CPARs, with the evaluations, with things that we know we're going to have to provide.
Right.
And so that takes us essentially to the best practices, and that leads right into that discussion. So we want to talk about the best practices. Okay, so essentially, going in a nutshell, the best practices are to involve the proposal manager in the capture process, include the capture manager in the proposal development, have them develop the win strategies, the themes, discriminators. When we say discriminators, we will just give you a quick synopsis of what that entails. Ideally, a discriminator is something that the customer wants, that you have, that your competition doesn't. While we understand that that's ideal, it doesn't happen in every circumstance. So we then default to what the client needs, what we have, what our competition has, and why we do it better, right? But initially, we want to try to go with and find, and this is why it takes time to do the capture, to get out ahead of these things. Another best practice, focus on the capture efforts, likely proposal instructions. Again, it's really important. And here your proposal manager will go back and try to clean out in the Q&As the discrepancies perhaps between L&M and all of that. We need to all work together as a team to make sure that happens. Then you would implement a concrete approach to translating capture information to the proposal team. That would entail a capture plan. So we do have, tools for that, check marks, lists to make sure that we didn't miss out on anything. Chipley does provide all of those tools. It is a quantifiable process, essentially. And then include the proposal manager in your gate reviews if possible. Again, in large companies, the proposal manager sometimes gets assigned at the end. However, if we have a concrete action plan for capture, it's easier to do the handoff, like you said, the baton passing, which is really a baton carrying by both the capture manager and the proposal manager. And then lastly, the same thing we say, try to at least get the components for your pink team before the final RFP drops. That's imperative, if possible.
Can I go back to L&M a minute?
Sure.
I remember years ago that I was told by an old proposal director, a large systems integrator, basically, son, you need to look at L&M first. always look at what the source selection criteria is and what the proposal submission requirements are. And I've made that a habit now. As soon as I pick up an RFP, I go to L&M. Nothing is worse than getting a nasty surprise that, wow, this isn't best value, this is LPTA. Or in a large company environment, hey, these past performance citations have to be of a certain type, a certain size, scope, and complexity. We haven't considered that. And suddenly a great capture falls on its face because it comes out in the way you didn't expect and didn't try to shape.
Right, and that's one of the things that we encourage as well, going directly to L&M. And we get that question a lot, which one comes first? And I say simultaneous, right? And C, of course, which is your task.
Sure.
And the reason why we emphasize that as well is because remember that compliance is the first and easiest way for the customer to disqualify. When they have to read, 200 of these proposals, the easiest way to do it without a protest essentially is compliance, and that's where you're going to hit the components of Section M. Now, when we're talking about L&M, we're talking about federal RFPs specifically. However, having said that, a lot of state and local do format theirs with some, differences, the same way that the federal government does. And then in the commercial world, you still do have an RFP, but it's not as delineated in terms of where you find the requirements. But essentially, we're talking about two things here when we say L&M. L is the requirements for submittal, page count, font, that kind of thing. And M is, these are the evaluation criteria. This is what we're going to look at. We're going to emphasize the technical more so over the management and the price combined. And we see that language all the time. So
one of the things that I'm saying, and it's a very, very crowded marketplace right now. And the government is receiving a very, very large number of proposals. So they are looking for methods to trim that number down. What are the trip points that will disqualify bidders? If you've got 47 proposals to review, you can't do that. So what you've got to do is have trip points that basically will reduce that 47 needing to be considered down to maybe 8 to 10.
And that's where it's really important to have a very strong compliance matrix and have several different independent reviewers just focusing on compliance alone to include your contracts.
But before you get there, the capture manager has to consider it as well. And the shaping activity, they can shape the requirement, but they also need to shape how this is being released.
Right, and a great time to do that is in capture. I feel like if we're waiting for the final Q&As, once the RFP drops, it's a little late for that, and that's where the capture manager comes in.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think here we've pretty much wrapped up everything as far as best practices is concerned. So in terms of final notes and summary, if we were to put this in a nutshell, we really need to understand the entire process from soup to nuts, which is essentially what we call phases 0 to 6, from market positioning, long range BD, all the way to submittal to final BAFO or final revision, proposal revision, which is what they're calling it now. And what that entails is, again, the most important thing, which is the customer analysis, followed by the competitor analysis, then your company's analysis, and then cost. And then for an effective capture, moving into that phase, it would really be devising a strong action plan, which is, what is that management plan going to look like? What is the technical going to look like? What is my past performance going to look like? Like you mentioned, Dr. Painter, do we qualify? And what is my key personnel going to look like? Because essentially, and the cost volume, those are the things that are being evaluated in all proposals, whether it be commercial, government, whatever. Those are essentially the main buckets. And when we're doing that, the thing that we really need to keep in consideration is this is not about making compliance, it's about making far exceeds, at least aiming to, in every single one of those volumes. That's how we win. That's how we increase P1, right? Mm-hmm. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mallory for questions.
Okay, so our first question that came in, Dr. Painter, I will ask you. How do you recommend working with a capture manager who just wants to throw you their information and stop involvement after that? They don't want to be involved in any of the proposal development?
Well, I would say that that particular capture manager is not going to be very effective. I guess that's the point of the question. I don't know. It's a difficult issue. I mean, perhaps you need to talk with your management about it. I can tell you that, and I've learned this the hard way, that the relationship between the capture manager and proposal manager is absolutely key. And you, as a proposal professional, are his customer. So he should be, or he or she should be, providing you the information, doing everything possible to give you the information that you need. And you should be feeding back your requirements to them as well. So good luck with it. I'm not sure I have a good answer for that.
Persistence.
This is true. Persistence. But again, ask the questions that you need to have answered.
Excellent. Okay, and Dr. Painter, I will ask you this one as well, and Nia, if you have comments after that. How essential is a strong RFI or sources sought response in the capture process, given this can go a long way in shaping the RFP?
Let me take a first cut at that. I have, over the years, become a real believer in sources sought and RFI responses. Didn't used to care much for them because they were very resource intensive, but they're resources well spent, and I'll tell you why. It's your ability to talk directly to the government and make recommendations, not only describe your capabilities, but how you will perform this work. What solutions that you have that may differentiate you from perhaps an incumbent or other companies, but more importantly, how you can shape how it's released. For example, we want it to come out on a particular contract vehicle. We want past performance to be of a certain type that better fits our ability to respond in a final RFP. We want the source selection criteria to be of a certain type that would advantage our company. It's your ability to basically message the government VFR direct and try to shape the procurement. So I highly recommend that you take it seriously. And again, it's something that we use at ICS very assertively, very aggressively.
I'm going to have to agree with that. We get that question a lot. How important is it to respond because the government's not essentially scoring it formally? This could go for any client, really, not just the government. But the answer is, that's when we say shaping, that's what we're moving it to a position where it is easier for us to get to and harder for our competition to get to, especially for small businesses. If we can respond and show that there are the rule of two, it used to be three now, that there are two businesses that can viably do this that are small. The government, I mean, I've seen this before, right? I was at smalls and largest. We convinced the government to issue this sole source. Hey, we can do this. We're the only ones who can do. You don't need to look any further. And that's kind of what you want to solidify in that RFI. So it's very important to respond to those. And I've talked to contracting officers continuously. They do the QC on a lot of the training work and material that we put out. And they consistently say there is a reason other than meeting our quota of having to do industry interactions. We are looking for industry to tell us, what should this look like? What would be ideal? What are your capabilities? They're asking. So it's a great opportunity to respond and get your foot in the door, like you said, Dr. Painter.
You know, going back to a small business environment, I don't want to beat this to death, but there's certain contract vehicles that you want the government to utilize. We want them to release this on GSA Mass, or we want them to release this on GSA Stars 3, or whatever the case may be. This is an opportunity for you to make big moves in how this procurement is released. One thing not to forget, though, if you make a recommendation, we would like the solicitation to come out in a certain way. You need to describe why. You need to formulate a reason, Mr. and Miss Government or Mr. and Miss Commercial Company, you need to release this request for proposal in a certain way because of these factors. So you need to have a why behind what your suggestions are.
And that's because on their end, they have to have a justification. It's a formal J&A, right?
Exactly.
And they have to be able to write it down and back it up. And now you're giving them that. That's where you go from what we talked about being the technical expert to being the trusted vendor, right? And that's where the difference comes in.
Right.
Go ahead, Mallory.
Excellent. Thank you. We have a couple more questions in here. And Neil, I'll pose this to you first. Who should capture managers be in contact with outside of contracting officers and PMs?
Who should they be in contact with outside of outside of PMs and what, Mallory?
And contracting officers.
They should be in touch with their entire team as far as internally is concerned, which would be pricing, because you want to do your green team in advance to make sure, like Dr. Painter says, can we do this at the rate and make some money off of it? They should be in touch with their contracts team internally, with their subject matter experts internally, the PMs we covered, and then on the outside, the government's PMO office, if they're able to reach them, and the contracts officer. Dr. Painter, since you're out there doing this, and I see you doing it very effectively with the government.
Well, you know, frankly, other companies as well that may have knowledge of this particular program, may not be bidding it, may have knowledge of the customer. I mean, if you can't get directly to the customer, there are companies in and around that space that you can go to that can probably give you some insight. So obviously you don't want to create your own competition, but at the same time, those are good sources of information, particularly if you know those companies and their trusted agents.
One of the most effective, for me, every capture that I've run, one of the most effective sources of information has been my teammates, because they're already in that space. Ideally, that's kind of who we want to team with, right?
Right.
Or they're looking to get into that space, and they, it's a team exercise. So when you're doing your black hats, you can do them informally as well. Call other companies and say, hey, I have a couple of questions. Do you know who would know this, or do you know it? And this is why it takes time, and we got to do that up front in capture. When the RFP drops, a little late for that, right? So yeah, you're right. One of the places to go is your team partners as well.
Excellent. Okay, Dr. Painter, let me rephrase this just a little bit. What can capture managers provide? What kind of input can they provide, or proposal managers, can provide when they are included in the capture process?
It's opportunity specific, but for example, the proposal manager can tell the capture manager, we have no information whatsoever about this particular technical aspect of the work. We don't know how to do it. We don't have a subject matter expert. How do we write to this? That's a gap. It's a technical gap, and it's something that the capture manager needs to be aware of. Now, he or she may not be able to ultimately fill that gap, but he or she has to be aware of that gap. Hey, our past performance probably isn't going to align to this requirement based on our understanding. The capture manager needs to be aware of that, so he or she can begin shaping that potentially with the customer. Hey, you don't need 4 past performance citations. Maybe 3 will do, and maybe only 1 needs to come from the prime. Things of that nature. But what I'm going to encourage the proposal manager to do, if they have a question, who, what, when, where, why, and how, of the capture manager, don't be afraid to ask it. And that then gives them a laundry list of the information that they need to continue to collect and try to shape.
Excellent, thank you. And one more question. What are oh, no, I just asked that one, sorry. Okay, so are there any extra capture activities outside of going to industry days? We have touched on this a little bit, but is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Outside of going to industry days, yeah, doing a formal capabilities matrix to find the best teammates. A lot of times you'll get teammates that are telling you on calls that they've done it all, they own it, they're in that space, and then you find out after they sign the TA, which hopefully is not happening, but we do see it happening a lot, that they did this work 8 years ago with half a full-time equivalent for 2 months, right? And that's not going to cut it. So you're trying to get the best team where you have redundancies and you're covering all of your gaps. That's something you should definitely not skip in the capture phase. The key personnel, another thing we see over and over again, because 80% of the work that Shipley does is consulting. And so we see the proposals and we do analysis on them. We see companies bidding their own PMO leads as key personnel. So what that makes the client think essentially is, are they bidding this person on every single opportunity? And are we really going to get this person, or are they going to backfill, right? And so really here, this is your opportunity to bring someone in who is in that space, who's worked it, whether it's a former, employee of the customer, or it's a subject matter expert. But those are the kinds of things you want to do in capture to, identify your key personnel, identify your team, establish who your subject matter experts are going to be, get something in writing. Perhaps if they're not working, get them to help you write the proposal, other effective things that you can do. The whole purpose of capture is to move that needle for the P-win, right? And every time you fill one of those gaps, that percentage goes up. There are only 4 things being evaluated. That is cost management, technical, past performance. That's where you want to focus, right? Get together with your customer and say, am I going to get a good evaluation on this? Is this what it's going to look like? So when the final drops, you're not trying to find out where the customer is, right? So in those 4 sections is where you want to focus during the capture phase.
So the question, if I understood it correctly, who else besides industry day type events should you talk to?
As far as the client is concerned?
Right, was that the question? What was the question again, Mallory? I'm sorry.
Oh, you're fine. So what are some of the best capture activities outside of going to industry days? So activity specific, but if you have personnel that would be good to talk to, I think that's valuable as well.
One of the things I do that I've learned to do over the years is I talk to the incumbent if there is one. I try to identify obviously who the incumbent subcontractors are, and I'll engage them as well. You'll be amazed at the amount of information you can get sometimes, but just simply making the telephone call or buying a lunch and sitting down and talking with them. Again, you want to be somewhat circumspect in what information you share, but don't be afraid to go to, if there is an incumbent, go to the incumbent of their subcontractor and start asking questions.
Excellent, thank you. So we did have one more question come in. Do you both have time for one more?
Sure.
All right. Okay, here it is. What are the best practices we need to follow and apply to ensure capturing opportunities process is always live and on track?
If you have a capture plan, you can use that plan and use it as part of gate reviews. That's really important. What we tell people is that the capture plan is alive and well, and it's a living, breathing document. Capture processes are as quantifiable as proposal processes are. They're absolutely aligned, right? You have capture calls weekly. You have your deck, which is essentially covering all the components of capture. You're tracking them just like you would a PM tracking, deliverables, schedules, dates, who's responsible, and you're going and getting that information and coming back. Continue to have your gate reviews. Whatever we want to call them in organizations and industry, you're going to have to review where you are with your P-win incrementally as you move across. And that P-win should be going up. Sometimes it won't go up. Sometimes you find out what your gaps are and now it's going down, and you have to continue to reevaluate that capture plan. Dr. Painter?
No, I agree with that 100%. Capture planning is absolutely essential. Plus the fact for most capture managers, they have a portfolio, or what we call a BD pipeline, that sometimes can be pretty sizable. So the only way you can keep track of 12, 13, 14 capture efforts simultaneously is to have a clearly articulated plan So you can pull that plan and say, this is where I am on this particular capture. These are the things I need to do on this particular capture. That's absolutely essential.
Right, and when we say capture plan, a lot of times we get people, saying that, and they don't really know what that means. That's an actual tool. It is a capture plan. It has pages, it has components that go into it. We provided it at Shipley. That way you know that you're not missing anything and you don't have one single point of failure, right? Anybody else can go into whatever your solution is, whether, whatever your portal is, repository for maintaining this information,
Right.
and click on your actual physical capture plan, look at it, and know where you are with each
know
component.
exactly where you are and
Right.
what needs to be done and who your contacts are
Right.
and what conversations have been held. It's it can become a very robust document, but it's a living document that will be updated all the time as your capture progresses.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, both of you, for sharing your wisdom with us today. And thank you to those of you who submitted questions. We loved having this question and answer discussion here at the end. Nia, Dr. Painter, do you have any final comments before we end?
No, I'm good.
I've really enjoyed this, and I hope the audience has found it useful. And thanks very much for the opportunity, Mallory.
All right. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Take care.